For 19 years, he stood by their side, and in the end, they left him behind like garbage. But even in the cold silence of the shelter, he waited, believing someone might still come back. For 19 long years, he had been the guardian of his home. He had stood through storms, chased away intruders, and offered his heart to the family he called his own. But when his muzzle turned gray and his legs began to tremble, they threw him away like worn-out furniture. Now, in the frigid silence of a shelter in Elk Valley, Colorado, a forgotten German shepherd named Max lay in the back corner of a cage, waiting, always waiting, for a family that would never return. The Elk Valley Rescue Center wasn't quiet. The sound of barking echoed against the concrete walls, a chorus of desperation from dogs longing for attention. But Max never barked. He hadn't made a sound in months. He was a shadow of who he once was. His fur was dull and matted, missing in patches along his spine. His ribs pressed faintly against his sides, his legs too stiff to hold him upright for long. At 19 years old, Max had become invisible. Puppies got visitors. Young dogs got adopted. But Max? Max was passed over again and again. Just another aging dog lying still in the corner, unseen. "Poor old man," whispered Leah, a soft-voiced volunteer who had grown used to seeing him curled up like that. She gently slid a bowl of fresh water into his cage. "Still not drinking?" "He doesn't even try anymore," said Sam, the shelter's director. He stood a few steps behind her, arms folded, gaze fixed on the unmoving dog. "Stopped eating properly after the third week. I think he knows they're not coming back. He's just waiting for something to end." Max's ears twitched, but he didn't lift his head. Not for Leah, not for Sam, not for anyone. But then, everything changed. That same afternoon, a woman named Rachel Monroe stepped through the shelter's doors. She hadn't planned to come. In fact, she hadn't been to the Elk Valley Rescue Center in over a year. The last time she had walked these halls, her husband Daniel had been by her side, laughing, kneeling to pet the dogs, his voice echoing down the corridor. That was before the cancer, before the hospital stays, before everything went dark. Rachel hadn't stepped foot in a shelter since his funeral. Not once. Not until today. She wasn't sure what brought her back. Maybe it was the silence of her house that had become unbearable. Maybe it was the ache that refused to fade from her chest. Or maybe it was something else. Something she couldn't name. Something pulling her to the place she once loved. She walked past rows of cages, eyes scanning young dogs, leaping up against the bars, barking and wagging their tails. Their hope, their energy, it was all too much. She was about to turn and leave when she saw it. A cage far back in the corner. A dog that didn't move, didn't lift his head, didn't bark. She stopped cold. "Who's that?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Sam followed her gaze. "That's Max. He's been with us 6 months." Rachel took a step closer, something tugging at her heart. "Why hasn't anyone taken him?" "He's old, 19. Doesn't eat much, doesn't interact. Most people want dogs with years left." He shrugged with the kind of heartbreak only someone in this job long enough could carry. Rachel moved closer, crouched down in front of the cage. "How did he end up here?" Leah's voice softened. "They said he was too old, that they didn't have the time to deal with him anymore." Rachel's breath hitched. "How long did they have him?" Sam hesitated. "Since he was a puppy." The weight of that hit her like a blow. 19 years, a lifetime, and they gave him up. She stared at Max through the cold steel bars. He didn't look at her. He didn't move. But Rachel saw something in him, something hollow and familiar. She knew that kind of emptiness. She carried it too. Without thinking, she reached for the cage door. She wasn't here to adopt a dog. She barely knew why she came. But the moment she opened that cage, something ancient and broken stirred between them. The metallic creak of the cage door echoed through the shelter. Rachel's hand trembled slightly as she pushed it open. She wasn't entirely sure what she expected, but it wasn't this. Max didn't even flinch. He stayed curled up on the torn blanket, eyes half shut, as if the world had long since stopped existing for him. Max, she whispered. Nothing. She stepped inside slowly, crouching beside him. The smell of old fur, antiseptic, and hopelessness filled her lungs. Her hand hovered just inches from his back. It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. Still nothing. Leah watched from behind the kennel door, her voice hushed. He doesn't react to anyone anymore. Doesn't bark, doesn't lick, just breathes. Sometimes I wonder if he's still even in there. But Rachel didn't move. Her eyes locked onto Max. She saw the way his chest rose and fell in shallow, exhausted breaths, the scars on his ears, the raw patches along his ribs. But it was his eyes that caught her, cloudy, dull, but not lifeless. Not yet. Max stirred, barely, just a twitch of his head, a flicker in his gaze. For a split second his eyes met Rachel's. There, right there, a flash, not of hope, but of memory. Rachel gasped quietly. It was like looking into a storm, a soul too tired to scream anymore. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't defensive. He was simply done. But so was she. Rachel reached out slowly, her fingers brushing against his fur. It was wiry, brittle, like something scorched by time. Max tensed just slightly. Not in pain, in fear. She felt her stomach twist. What happened to you? She whispered, barely able to speak. Behind her, Sam shifted. Don't take it personally. A couple people looked at him, but once they saw how old he was, how weak, they didn't want to take home a dog they might lose in a week. Rachel's hand lingered on Max's back. But he's still here. Sam nodded, his voice low. Barely. There was a silence, heavy and raw. Max closed his eyes again, retreating to wherever he went in that quiet mind of his. Rachel looked up. You said his family had him since he was a puppy? Sam sighed. That's what they told us. 19 years. Then one day they just walked in, filled out the forms and left. Did they say why? Leah spoke quietly. Too old. No time. Not fair to the kids. Same reasons we always hear. But Rachel wasn't listening anymore. She stared at Max like he held answers to questions she'd never dared to ask. She knew that kind of silence, knew what it meant to watch your world fall apart and be too numb to cry. She knelt a little closer. Max, she murmured, look at me. And for the second time he did, this time longer. And in that look, brief, hollow, haunting, Rachel felt something crack inside her. She saw herself. Max looked away again, eyes drifting toward the wall, as if he were watching something only he could see. Or maybe someone. Maybe someone he'd been waiting for. Rachel stood, her voice catching in her throat. I'll take him. Sam blinked. Rachel, I said I'll take him. You don't have to decide right now. Think about it. He may not even make it through the week. He hasn't eaten in days. I know. She turned to Max again. But if it's his last night, it won't be here. Not in a cage. Sam was quiet. Then slowly, he nodded. Okay, I'll start the paperwork. Rachel turned back toward Max. Her hand brushed his back again, just lightly. He didn't pull away this time. Not progress, but not surrender either. Just acknowledgement. She carried him out of that place with trembling arms. But he didn't react. No struggle, no sound, just silence, as if he'd already said goodbye to the world. The paperwork was a blur. Rachel didn't remember signing the forms, didn't hear the words Sam said as he handed over the leash. She just stood there staring at Max, trying to figure out if this was hope or desperation. Maybe both. Leah handed her a blanket and a few pills. For his joints, she said softly, her eyes red. Just be gentle with him. Rachel nodded. Then came the hardest part, getting him into the car. Max didn't resist when she crouched beside him. He didn't lift his head, didn't blink. His body was so frail, Rachel felt her arms tremble under the weight. And not because he was heavy, because he felt like a ghost. She held him like she was carrying something sacred, something already halfway gone. She laid him carefully across the back seat, wrapped the blanket around his thin frame, and paused, watching. Was he breathing? Yes, barely. She closed the door. The drive home was silent. The highway stretched on through the falling snow, blanketing the road in white and muting the world around them. Inside the car, the heater hummed. Max didn't move once. Rachel kept glancing into the rearview mirror, hoping to catch a flick of his ear, a shift of his paw. Anything, but nothing. She gripped the steering wheel tighter. What have I done? She hadn't thought this through. She lived alone. She hadn't taken care of anything since Daniel, not even herself. And now she'd brought home a dog who might die before the week was over, or before the night was. She pulled into her small cabin, tucked between frost-bitten pine trees, headlights cutting across the porch. The sky was growing darker. Wind howled through the trees like a warning. Rachel stepped out, boots crunching against snow. The air hit her face, sharp and biting. She opened the back door. "Max," she whispered. Still no movement. Panic twisted inside her. She crouched beside him and placed a hand on his chest. A faint breath. Relief flooded her in a wave so fast it made her knees buckle. "Okay," she whispered, forcing herself to steady. "We're home." She reached under him, feeling the protrusion of ribs beneath her palms, the way his legs dangled. Weightless. He didn't fight. He didn't even look at her. She carried him like a fallen soldier, silent, heavy with memories. Inside, the house was still and dim. The scent of old wood and forgotten memories filled the space. Rachel hadn't changed anything since Daniel died. His boots still sat by the door, his mug still on the shelf. The silence felt heavier than it ever had. She laid Max down on a plush bed by the fireplace. He curled into himself, barely moving. She grabbed a blanket and tucked it gently over him, as if trying to shield him from the years that had already broken him. "You're safe now," she murmured. He didn't stir. Rachel stood, unsure what to do next. She moved to the kitchen, grabbed a bowl, and poured warm broth over soft kibble. She set it down gently in front of him. "Come on," she whispered, kneeling. "Try just a little." Max blinked. Once, but he didn't move, didn't sniff the bowl. Rachel's throat tightened. "You have to eat." He stared through her, not at her, through her. It was like he wasn't even here. She sighed and reached for a blanket, draping it around her own shoulders as she slumped onto the nearby couch. The fire crackled, casting flickers of amber across the room. She watched him, watched the slow rise and fall of his breath. Hours passed, and then, just as she began to drift into uneasy sleep, a soft sound snapped her eyes open, a faint, barely audible whimper. Rachel sat up straight. Max was still curled on the bed, but his ears had twitched. He was dreaming, or remembering, and for the first time since she met him, he made a sound. She thought he was too far gone to feel anything, but in the middle of the night, he stood up and stared at something that shattered her. Rachel woke with a start. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. The air inside the house had grown cold, a low hum of wind sneaking through the window panes. Her neck ached from where she dozed off on the couch. But it wasn't the discomfort that woke her. It was the silence. Too still. She blinked and sat up, gaze shifting toward the fireplace. Max's bed was empty. Her breath hitched. She rose quickly, heart hammering in her chest, scanning the room. Her feet padded silently across the cold wood floor. Then she saw him. He stood in the hallway, rigid, still, as if carved from stone. Rachel's first instinct was fear. Had something startled him? But then she followed his gaze. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the wall. Rachel's eyes followed his line of sight, and her stomach flipped. He was staring at a picture of Daniel. An old photograph, one Rachel hadn't moved in years, sat framed above the hallway table. Daniel in his uniform, crouching beside a dog, smiling, frozen in time. Max stood like he was seeing a ghost. His cloudy eyes were locked on that image with a focus she hadn't seen from him once. Not at the shelter, not in the car, not even when she spoke his name. Rachel approached slowly. "Max?" she whispered. He didn't turn, didn't blink, just stood there, frozen, his breath shallow, body tense, eyes unblinking. Then, without warning, he let out a sound, a low, broken whimper. Rachel's blood ran cold. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a growl. It was grief, raw and trembling. A sound so full of longing it felt like it reached into her chest and pulled. Rachel stood behind him, barely able to breathe. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She couldn't. He hadn't made a sound since the shelter, hadn't acknowledged her, hadn't acknowledged anything. But now he was responding to a man he had never met. Or had he? "Max," she said again, voice even softer. "What are you seeing?" The old shepherd didn't answer, but something shifted, a faint tremor in his legs, a twitch in his ears. His eyes stayed locked on Daniel's face. Rachel knelt slowly, placing her hand gently on Max's back. He didn't flinch, not this time, but he didn't relax either. He was straining, fighting something deep inside. Memories, pain, recognition. Rachel didn't know. She just stayed with him, hand resting against his fur, her heart pounding. After what felt like an eternity, Max turned his head, slowly, painfully, and looked at her. His eyes weren't empty this time. They were searching. For what? She didn't know. She led him back to the fireplace, helped him settle into his bed again. But that moment, it lingered. Rachel stared at the photograph long after Max fell asleep. Her mind spun. Why had he reacted that way? Why now? Why Daniel? She didn't sleep again that night. The next morning came with a bitter wind rattling the windows and frost creeping along the glass. But inside something felt different. Rachel stirred groggily, rubbing her temples, then froze. Max was watching her, not just awake, but alert. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd seen since she met him. She stood slowly and walked toward the kitchen. Said nothing, made no sound. After a few seconds, she heard it, the soft shuffle of paws behind her. She turned. Max was there, standing in the doorway, wobbly, but standing. He responded to nothing, no sound, no word, until he saw that photo. She thought it was coincidence, until she uncovered what they'd been hiding. Rachel stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, holding her breath. Max stood a few feet away, his paws planted unsteadily on the hardwood floor. He was staring at her, fully, truly for the first time. Her throat tightened. "Hey, buddy," she whispered. He didn't move closer, but he didn't walk away either. He just stood there watching. It was subtle, barely anything. But to Rachel, it felt like a beginning. She crouched down slowly, not wanting to spook him. "You hungry?" Still nothing. But she thought, just maybe, his ears had perked. She poured warm broth over a bowl of kibble and set it on the floor, backing away to give him space. Max watched, waited, and then slowly, with trembling legs and cautious steps, he approached. One sniff, then another, and finally he ate. Rachel's breath caught. It wasn't much, just a few bites, but it was more than she'd hoped for. And when he finished, he looked at her again. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it wasn't emptiness either. She knelt and whispered, "I think you're starting to come back to me." The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. Max began trailing Rachel from room to room, always at a distance, never close, but never far either. He didn't bark, didn't play, but he watched, observed, like he was memorizing the layout, like he was evaluating something. Rachel started talking to him. She didn't expect answers, but she needed someone to hear her. And Max listened, always listening. One evening, Rachel sat curled under a blanket, flipping through an old photo album. The pages felt heavier than usual. She paused at a picture. Daniel, years younger, kneeling beside a German Shepherd puppy. Her fingers trembled. She glanced at Max, who was lying nearby, eyes closed, his body curled tightly into itself. "I think you would have liked him," she whispered. Max's ears flicked. She blinked. "Did you hear that?" she asked, half smiling. He didn't respond, but something about the moment lingered. Rachel stared at the photo again. The resemblance between the puppy and Max, it was subtle, but the more she looked, the more it bothered her. The same slope of the back, the ears, the eyes, it couldn't be. Could it? She grabbed the intake paperwork from the shelter. She hadn't even read it closely until now. But the records were thin, too thin, just a name, Max. No microchip information, no medical history, just a scribbled note. Owner surrendered due to age. Had since puppyhood. It didn't feel right. Rachel flipped the form over. Blank. She stared at the name Max. Her gut twisted. She remembered something Leah had said. That's what they told us. Told, not confirmed. What if the name wasn't even real? What if the people who surrendered him had lied? Rachel's pulse began to rise. She needed answers. Real ones. She grabbed her coat, slipped her boots on, and pulled the intake form close. There was an address. The people who had left Max. They might not have told the shelter everything. She wasn't going there to judge them. She wasn't even angry. She just needed to understand who this dog really was. She scribbled the address into her phone's GPS. It was less than an hour away. As she turned back toward Max, her heart thudded with uncertainty. He was still asleep, still peaceful, but her instincts screamed. This wasn't just some old dog abandoned by a busy family. There was something in his bones, something in the way he moved, the way he stared at Daniel's picture. This wasn't over. She knocked on their door expecting an explanation. What she got instead was a confession, a secret that had been buried for years. The house was larger than Rachel expected. A pale brick two-story nestled at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, its porch lined with flower pots and a glossy black SUV in the driveway. The lawn was manicured, the windows spotless. Nothing about the home suggested loss or hardship. Rachel parked at the curb, her grip tightening around the printed intake form. Her heart was pounding, part nerves, part adrenaline. She wasn't here for confrontation, just the truth. She stepped onto the porch and knocked. A moment passed. Then the door opened. A woman in her early 60s answered, dressed in an elegant cardigan and pearls. Her eyes were cool, her posture rigid. She looked at Rachel like she didn't recognize her, which of course, she didn't. "Can I help you?" the woman asked. Rachel took a breath. "My name's Rachel Monroe. I adopted a dog recently, from the Elk Valley shelter. He was surrendered under the name Max." The woman blinked. Something in the woman's face shifted. "Oh," she said flatly. "Him. Not Max. Him." Rachel's stomach turned. "I was hoping," she said carefully, "you could tell me more about him, his history, his background. He's different." The woman pursed her lips. "We had him a long time. He started slowing down. Wasn't fair to keep him. Our kids moved out. We travel a lot. It just didn't make sense anymore." Rachel stared at her, waiting. But that was it. That was all she was going to say. "He's 19, Rachel said quietly. "You knew no one would adopt him." The woman shrugged. "The shelter exists for dogs like that. Someone eventually did, right?" Rachel's breath caught in her throat. "I did. And I'm trying to understand what kind of life he had before all this. Because there's something about him that doesn't add up." The woman shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know what you want me to say." "I want the truth," Rachel said, her voice calm but firm. "He's not just some old house dog. He reacts to things, people, pictures, things he shouldn't recognize." The woman didn't respond. "I think he had another life. Before you." Still silence. And then, finally, the woman spoke. "You should talk to my husband." She stepped back and called over her shoulder. "Tom, can you come here?" Rachel's pulse quickened. A man emerged from the hallway, tall and gray-haired, with shoulders that had once been broad but now sagged slightly under time. His eyes met Rachel's with a quiet wariness. "You have him?" he asked. Rachel nodded slowly. "Yes." The man exhaled. It wasn't relief. It wasn't joy. It was something more complicated. I think, Rachel said carefully, he used to go by a different name, didn't he? The man looked away. You were a cop, she added, voice steady, his head lowered, confirming without a word. Rachel's throat tightened. He wasn't your pet. He was your partner. Silence, then, finally, he spoke. His name was Rex, the man said quietly. Before we started calling him Max, before we tried to make him into something he wasn't. Rachel felt the air shift. Rex. It fit. The discipline. The silence. The way he scanned rooms like he was still on duty. And the way he'd reacted to Daniel's picture. Daniel, who had been a paramedic. Another uniform. Another memory. You lied on the surrender form, Rachel said quietly. We didn't think it mattered, the man said, his voice cracking. He was old. People don't want old dogs. We figured giving him a regular name gave him a better chance. You could have told someone who he really was, she whispered. I couldn't do it, he said. I couldn't watch him die. You left him in a cage. His eyes darkened. You don't understand. We were partners for years. He saved my life once. Took down a guy with a gun inches from me. But when he got old, when he stopped recognizing me, when he started forgetting his commands, his voice broke. I lost him long before we walked into that shelter. Rachel didn't speak. She didn't need to, because she understood something the man didn't. Rex hadn't forgotten. He'd just been waiting for someone to remember him. She had called him Max for days and he never responded. But the moment she whispered Rex, he looked at her like he'd been holding his breath for years. The road home felt longer this time. Rachel's hands clenched the steering wheel, the wind whispering against the glass like voices she couldn't quite silence. The man's words echoed in her mind over and over. He wasn't our pet. He was my partner. Rex. Not Max. It explained everything. The quiet vigilance, the way he scanned the room, the way he froze at Daniel's photo. It wasn't just grief, it was memory, buried under years of silence. She pulled into the driveway, her breath fogging the windshield. For a moment, she didn't move. She stared at her front door, at the dim porch light flickering in the cold, and wondered what came next. She had adopted a dog. Instead, she had brought home a veteran. Inside, the house was still. She stepped in quietly, her boots wet with melting snow. And there he was, lying by the fireplace just as she'd left him. Except now as she entered, he lifted his head. His cloudy eyes met hers, not blankly, not absently, but with focus, like he was waiting. Rachel knelt beside him, fingers trembling slightly. I know who you are now, she whispered. He blinked. I know what they did to you. A silence fell between them, thick with meaning. You weren't just a good boy, she said, her voice cracking. You were the best, and they didn't deserve you. She reached out gently, brushing her fingers along the ridge of his back. He didn't flinch. In fact, he leaned in, just slightly, like her touch meant something again. Her throat tightened. I'm sorry it took me this long, she whispered. Then carefully she said it. Rex. His ears twitched. Her breath caught. Rex, she repeated, this time louder. His head lifted. And then, for the first time since she'd brought him home, he moved toward her, slow, wobbly, but deliberate. He pressed his nose into her lap and let out a low exhale, like something old and locked away had finally cracked open inside him. Rachel's eyes welled with tears. You remember, she whispered. She didn't need a bark. She didn't need a wag. That single gesture said everything. He hadn't forgotten. They had just tried to erase him. She ran her hand gently down his side, her voice barely steady. You were someone. You did something that mattered. And now, you're home. Rex closed his eyes, breathing steady. His body relaxed in a way she hadn't seen before. And for a fleeting moment, just a moment, he didn't look tired anymore. That night, Rachel didn't sleep much. She sat beside him for hours, watching his chest rise and fall, afraid to look away. Not because she feared he'd disappear, but because she didn't want to miss this version of him, the one who knew who he was again. In the early hours of morning, she stirred when she felt something warm press against her leg. Rex. He had shifted, moved closer, laid his head gently against her knee. Rachel smiled softly, brushing her hand through his fur. "I won't leave you," she said. "Not now. Not ever." He didn't open his eyes, but his tail moved, a faint, slow wag against the blanket. And that was all she needed. She thought they had more time. But early that morning, he let out a sound she'd never heard before, a sound that shattered her. The sun had barely broken over the horizon when it happened. Rachel had dozed off beside the fireplace, her hand still resting on Rex's back. The air was still, the world outside blanketed in fresh snow, and the glow of dawn spilled gently across the wooden floor. Then a sound, low, choked, not a bark, not a growl, a whimper, but not the kind that came from dreams. Rachel's eyes snapped open. Rex was convulsing. "No!" she gasped, dropping to her knees. His body trembled violently, legs twitching, mouth slack. His breathing was shallow, uneven, like each breath was a battle. "Rex!" she cried, hands trembling as she touched his face. "Come on, stay with me." His eyes were half-lidded, unfocused, and his body burned with fever under her palm. "Please, no, please not now." She fumbled for her phone, dialing with shaking fingers. The vet's office picked up on the third ring. "Dr. Whitaker's office." "He's not breathing right," she choked. "His body's shaking. He won't respond." "Bring him in. Now." Rachel didn't wait. She wrapped him in his blanket and lifted him into her arms. He didn't resist. He didn't even react. He felt like a memory slipping through her fingers. She ran. The drive to the clinic was a blur of icy roads, red lights she didn't remember running, and whispered pleas through clenched teeth. "Hold on, please. I'm not done fighting for you." The world narrowed to one thing, getting him there in time. When she burst through the vet's doors, they were already waiting. A tech took him from her arms, disappearing into the back while Rachel stood frozen in the lobby, hands still shaking, heartbeat thunderous. She didn't remember sitting down, didn't remember crying, but when Dr. Whitaker returned, the look on his face told her everything. "He's stable," the vet said gently. Rachel nearly collapsed from the release. "But," he continued, "his body is shutting down. His organs are weak, very weak. He's fighting, but barely." Rachel's eyes burned. "I know he's old, but he's still trying. He just started eating. He follows me. He knows his name again. He knows who he is." Dr. Whitaker nodded slowly. "That's why I wanted to speak to you, Rachel. There are 3 paths forward." She looked at him, barely breathing. "First," he said softly, "we let him go. No pain. Peacefully. He's earned that." Rachel's hands curled into fists. "Second, we continue with basic care. Keep him comfortable. Let nature take its course." She shook her head. "Not enough." The vet paused. "There is a third option," he said finally. "Intensive care, fluids, medications, physical therapy, monitoring around the clock. It won't be easy for either of you, and it's not guaranteed to work." Rachel stared at him. "But if you fight for him, I think he'll fight too." A long silence stretched between them. Rachel felt everything all at once. Grief, hope, fear, determination. Her voice, when it finally came, was steady. "We fight," Dr. Whitaker nodded. "Then let's get to work." The next 2 weeks were hell. Rex came home on medications Rachel couldn't even pronounce. She hand-fed him every bite of food, carried him up and down the porch steps, set alarms for his medicine, slept beside him every night. There were moments she thought he was slipping away. Moments she stood in the hallway sobbing, whispering, "Please, not yet." But then something shifted. One morning she found his bowl half empty. Another day he nudged her hand with his nose. And then, one evening, as she was massaging his stiff legs, he did something that stopped her breath cold. He licked her hand. It was small. It was everything. For weeks he couldn't even lift his head. But on that cold morning, he stood, shaking, wobbling, on legs the world had given up on, and walked toward her. The sky was still gray when Rachel stepped outside with a mug of coffee cradled in her hands. Frost clung to the porch railing. Pines stood stiff in the windless silence. Winter hadn't let go yet. Behind her, the screen door creaked. She turned and stopped breathing. Rex was standing, not propped up, not leaning against the wall, standing, all on his own. His legs trembled beneath him, like twigs swaying in a slow breeze. His body wobbled with every inch of effort, but he was up. And then, one step. Rachel dropped the mug. It shattered against the porch floor, but she didn't move. Couldn't. Rex took another step, slower, stiffer, then another. 3 steps. Rachel's hands flew to her mouth. "You're doing it," she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "You're really doing it." He paused halfway across the porch, his chest rising and falling with labored breath. His tail didn't wag, his ears didn't perk, but his eyes, clouded as they were, found hers, alive, for the first time, truly alive. She knelt slowly, hands trembling. "Come here, boy, come on." Rex took one more step, then another, until his head pressed gently against her chest. Rachel broke. Tears fell without permission, splashing onto his fur as she wrapped her arms around his neck. "You're still here," she whispered. "You're still fighting." Rex closed his eyes. His breath hitched, but not from pain. It was peace, quiet, trust, and something more. Belonging. From that moment on, everything changed. He still slept more than not. His appetite was small. His legs still trembled when he walked. But now, he walked. He followed Rachel from room to room. He waited at the door when she left. He nudged her hand when she stayed too long in her thoughts. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was returning. One evening, as the fire cracked and Rachel flipped through old photo albums, Rex curled up beside her, not near her, but against her. Her hand rested on his back instinctively. She paused at a photo. It was Daniel, holding a puppy in uniform, laughing in front of the fire station. She turned the album so Rex could see. "You met someone like him, didn't you?" she whispered. "Someone who meant everything." Rex didn't look at the photo. He didn't have to. His eyes met hers instead, and she saw it again, that glimmer, that quiet storm behind his gaze, the part of him that had once fought beside someone, lost someone, been left behind, but now he was found. Rachel wiped at her cheek, smiling through the tears. "You're not Shadow anymore," she said softly. "You're not just Max either." Her hand ran gently along his spine. "You're Rex, and you're mine now." The dog let out a soft sigh. His body relaxed, and for the first time in his 19 years, he wasn't waiting to die. He was living. He had been forgotten, discarded, left to fade away in silence. But she didn't just save his life. She reminded him who he was, and that was enough to save her too. Spring came slowly to Elk Valley. The snow didn't melt in a day. It retreated in pieces, inch by inch, revealing the hidden ground beneath. Life returned in cautious colors, a dash of green in the grass, a ripple of blue in the sky, the scent of thawed earth in the breeze. And on that quiet hilltop porch, Rex stood once again, old bones, cloudy eyes, but steady legs. Rachel sat beside him in a rocking chair, her coffee warm in her hands, sunlight falling over the wooden floorboards. They didn't speak, but they didn't need to. Rex lay at her feet, watching the world like he always had. Not for threats, not out of fear, but simply out of habit, a guardian's habit, a soldier's rhythm that never truly disappeared. He had changed, but he had not disappeared. Some days were harder than others. He still had bad nights. There were moments when his legs gave out, when his breathing grew shallow, when Rachel found herself kneeling beside him with fear gnawing at her heart. But every time he came back, and every time she was there. The vet had told her he might have days, maybe weeks, but weeks turned into months. Not because of medicine alone, but because Rex had chosen to live. He had chosen her. Sometimes Rachel would speak aloud, not to fill the silence, but to share it. You were trained to serve, she said one night, brushing his fur with slow, gentle hands. To protect, to obey, to never ask for anything in return. Rex shifted in his sleep. And they repaid you by abandoning you. Her voice broke. But not me. I won't be another person who forgets you. Rex let out a low, tired sigh, curling deeper into the blanket beneath him. She smiled softly. You're not a broken old dog, she whispered. You're a warrior. You've always been a warrior. As the weeks passed, his steps grew more confident. His eyes, while still clouded, held focus. He began greeting her at the door when she came in from errands. He slept near her feet when she worked. And every once in a while, on quiet mornings, he'd surprise her with a slow wag of his tail. It wasn't joy, exactly. It was trust. The kind that couldn't be forced or trained. The kind that was earned, moment by moment, through darkness, through healing. Rex had stopped waiting to die. He had remembered how to live. And Rachel? She stopped mourning a life that had ended and started living the one that had waited for her to begin again. Not because of a man, but because of a dog, because of Rex. The dog who had been more than a pet, a partner, a soldier, a survivor. And finally, a soul that had been lost and found. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share so we can keep bringing you true stories of hope, healing, and second chances. Because every life, no matter how forgotten, is worth saving.